So, what is actually happening in 1599? You got this guy named Heywood, who in the early part of February writes the first part of Henry IV. Now, you may recall that Shakespeare has a play called The First Part of Henry IV, which was called The History of Henry IV when it was published. And what I understood this morning, granted it was this morning when I read this, that the confusing part was that actually his thing got titled The First Part, so everyone thought that they were actually reading Shakespeare when they were really reading Heywood. And apparently this was very seditious, this particular play. This guy was a lawyer, and he had used a lot of one of the Roman historians that had become very, very popular, and really sort of, in a very satirical manner, really kind of going at Henry IV and how he kind of went about going at things. So this is kind of slightly dangerous to be talking about sort of the heritage of Elizabeth. And sort of really kind of going at how unsavory that may have been done, versus our assumption about the way Shakespeare seems to have sort of privileged Henry IV, sort of like the real hero. You know, when Richmond comes into that play and sort of really bops off Richard III, we all think, oh, that's great. You know, he's supposed to do that. Okay, so that's happening. We've got this, beginning in 1599, there's huge, it's not so quiet anymore. Everyone's kind of taking bets on who's going to be the next king. You know, is it going to be James of Scotland? Is it going to be the Spanish guy? Is it going to be Essex? Is it going to be, there's somebody else too. And this is all starting to really bubble up to the point where people are actually talking about it, you know, alighting in public. And there was this, there was another Catholic uprising that had been suppressed. So all this stuff is starting to really kind of create a high tension. And by June 1st, they ban this book because it's so dangerous, its discussion and explanation of Henry IV. And they ban about 20 other books too and burn them. There's a huge burning that happens. And so that this is, you know, it's kind of a huge deal, obviously, when all this stuff is burned. And there is another Spanish Armada take two. We all remember in 1588, Spain came over, and, you know, we're defeated by the little Henry V band of brothers who take on the well-equipped Spanish Armada. And there was rumblings for about 4 months that they were coming back. 11 years later, they're coming back. They're going to finish the job. They don't actually finish the job. And they don't actually invade, but there's 4 months of tension, like people are recruited, and there's militias set up, and there's rules, and there's protect the Thames, I mean, all this kind of extra tension all summer long. So all these things are kind of bubbling up, which is sort of interesting if you think about what happens in Julius Caesar, isn't it? Censorship, right. Now we're back to Sin of the Poet. Of all the major playwrights, Shakespeare managed to avoid a major confrontation. No, his plays were not burned in this June 1st banning in 1599. Again, this whole notion of genius knows how far to go without getting caught, perhaps. I don't know. But that's sort of an interesting thing. And the speculation by James Shapiro is that this is a play about censorship and silencing. Right, that it goes right at it. It's not a satire about it, it actually is about it. And Sin of the Poet, of course, that scene, who words cannot save him, right? Cannot save him in the scene. He is confused for somebody else and is put to death, similar to the way Caesar is put to death later as well in the play. So it's an interesting sort of parallel about censorship and about the silencing of any voices that don't go along with whatever is the current thought of the time, right? So you've got this whole notion of balancing pro-republicanism and undermining and justifying regicide, which we talked about a little bit earlier too, I think. Right? Okay. Production history. They think it was one of the first plays produced at the Globe. It's possible it was the first play that was performed at the new space of the Globe. Not sure. They have a record of it in September 21st. The Globe opened sometime in the late summer, and so it's really possible that he was writing Julius Caesar to be performed at the Globe, which is also kind of interesting to think about it. What kind of line are you going to walk when you're going to have this thing open your theater and it's going to be a real public thing, right? folio-only play. There's some speculation about how dangerous it would have been to have published it because of sort of the line that he is walking about it. And so it's a very clean play in that regard. There are very little textual sort of emendations about it. It actually was from all the work that I've done on it so far, it really sort of represents itself as it is. And there was a really whole interesting speculation in the 1590s and early 1600s about some of those history plays, how they were sanitized by the king's men to the Lord Chamberlain's men to make sure that they were okay for publication, and that there was an interesting dichotomy between saying something on stage which had less danger than something that was printed. Right? So you can kind of get away with saying, it's like, oh, you just kind of hope that the FAA doesn't catch you when you say the dirty word on TV, right? Versus printing it. So I thought that was kind of interesting. The play is popular after the Restoration. It becomes very popular by the 19th century. And then, of course, it's popular with high school curriculum. The speculation is because there's no sex. And there's no, there's none of those stupid jokes about, body parts or whatever, right? So that, and as kind of a contrast to Romeo and Juliet. So I don't know if it's still popular in high school. Is it still popular? Oh, right. Facts about the play. It is this bridge between the history to tragedies we were talking about, sort of interesting, like halfway through his career. About kind of 60% into his career, in that sort of really interesting kind of way. He's going from Henry V to Hamlet in this interesting period. It is one of the shortest plays, like the 8th shortest. This is the 3rd shortest tragedy. 90% verse. Lot of, Ursula, you'll love this, right? Lot of monosyllabic words. No play of Shakespeare has so many. We'll talk a lot about this next week. The power of that and the use of that, how clean and clear that is, and what is that really saying, and that the homogeneity of the world of the military men. In some ways you can't tell them apart, because they've all been taught this syntax. Right? So all of a world. And so he's trying to create the world, through a theatrical syntax. And this notion of it being really compressed, Shapiro has this really interesting speculation that because it is of it feels so of a piece that he thinks it was written in a couple of days, which it could very well have been. I mean, once you sort of get an idea about something, but it has that sort of completeness to it, and this sort of cleanness to it. And so it's possible that's what it was. So you have that energy when you enter it, right? So how do you keep that energy alive when you enter the play to honor sort of what's inscribed in terms of sort of the structure and the event thing. We'll talk about that more in a couple of weeks. I think that's it. Done. End of slideshow. Anyway, so that's our introduction to Julius Caesar.